So we're starting our Lenten sermon series today based on Brian McLaren's We Make This Road by Walking. And McLaren argues that the purpose of the Christian faith is to be a movement that is global, spiritual, and social in a quest for what he calls aliveness. The Spirit offers aliveness to the community that is the church amidst powerful forces that want to deaden us to what really matters. McLaren says that aliveness is what most people are after in life, in his experience, but fewer people are seeking it in the church because, he says, religion too often shrinks, starves, cages, and freezes aliveness rather than fostering it. I know that many of us wrestle with this contradiction between the Spirit that offers life in the way of faith and our frustrations with the Christian religion that sometimes seems to act opposite to Christ's way of loving and living. But McLaren makes the point that what Jesus brought in the Sermon on the Mount on that hillside in Galilee wasn't a make our religion great again nostalgia, nor was it an attempt to create a new age religion. It was a global uprising that began with a focus on a new identity, a reflection about who we are, who we want to be, and what kind of people God knows we can become in the world. Now, according to Jesus, today, the people of God already have what we need to live the kind of joyful lives that McLaren is speaking about. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek, blessed are present tense. We are already blessed, not because it is fun to mourn, or profitable to be meek or merciful, or safe to be peacemakers, but because we have a different frame of reference. The coming kingdom of God, a frame of reference that helps us see more than just loss and war and conflict around us. We have eyes to see God at work in the midst of all the mess in and through and beyond our living. I shared with our session yesterday in our retreat, that's the leadership of our church, some recent writing by Walter Brueggermann, who is known for coining the concept of prophetic imagination. Prophetic imagination, he writes, consists in the capacity to host a world other than the one that is in front of us. Thus, the ancient prophets in Israel lived in a world that was propelled by money, power, wisdom, fear, and violence. But the world to which they bore witness was very different. That world, he writes, given mostly in poetic imagery, is a world where God governs with a will for justice and compassion. In that imagined world to which they bore witness, God has a ready, willing capacity to create joyous, viable conditions for life. Now, recently, Brueggermann was teaching about prophetic imagination, and in a slip of the tongue, instead of saying prophetic imagination, he said instead, pathetic imagination. And rather than ignore his slip, he began to play with pathetic imagination as the more dominant idea that is operative in our world. Pathetic imagination, he writes, is the assumption that the world immediately in front of us is the only world on offer. Thus, all possible futures are contained within present observable social reality. This, in effect, means that there are no alternatives to what we have before us. And so no chance for change, no offer of alternative, no possibility of newness. With pathetic imagination, we can see only the world where the poor in spirit are naive suckers, where those who mourn are encouraged to just get over it, where the meek get taken advantage of, and those who hunger and thirst for righteousness are wasting their time, and the merciful get walked all over. And we all know from experience that this is sometimes true. This is sometimes the way the world works, maybe even more probable than not, when you allow yourself to love and hunger for justice and match cruelty with kindness. The safer way to live is to use our knowledge of these experiences of life and become as self-sufficient as possible, reduce our exposure to potential loss, toughen up our egos, and act like we know more than we do. Forget about righteousness and harden our hearts to vulnerability as much as we are able. It's just that, according to Jesus, life isn't very lively in that case. I mean, what you see then is what you get. Fewer surprises, less connection with other people, less purpose in the world, fewer opportunities to come alive. The trouble is that if you live according to Jesus' beatific vision, you are going to get hurt more. You are likely to suffer more. You're probably going to accumulate less wealth than you might otherwise. In some cases, you might even get persecuted. That's the opposite of what some of the prosperity gospel folks preach, I know, and it's not that they are entirely wrong. I mean, when you live like this, Jesus promises, you really come alive. You love more deeply. You have a greater sense of purpose in the world than you ever imagined you might. And as a result, you have a greater capacity to suffer for all the things that matter, like cleaning up the planet, or doing your part to end all war, or resisting white supremacy whenever and wherever it rears its head, or practicing kindness when it's obviously getting you nowhere in a particular moment. It's not that you will have less suffering or less struggle. It's that the joy that rises up to match it will be unlike anything you've ever known. I'm afraid that prophetic imagination has been on a bit of a downturn lately. Part of that is no doubt due to the pandemic. I mean, we spent a good year and a half having to face the realities of what we could not do together. How many times did we have to say no to human connection in order to say yes to health and safety? It's not that the no's were a bad idea. It's just that when you get used to that frame of mind for so long, the prophetic imagination muscles atrophy a bit. Add to that our political discourse, which has also been marked by pathetic imagination. Have you seen how any leaders talking about ending poverty or other moonshot ideas that require the capacity to host a world other than the one that is before us? The only people authorized to dream those dreams in our culture right now are the super wealthy, a byproduct of our economic systems that have encouraged more and more people to trade in their imagination for what's possible for cash that doesn't always satisfy the way it promises. And that pathetic imagination can't help but seep its way into the church when we let budgets and pointless battles, and we've tried that before thinking, limit the real possibilities that God puts in front of us for coming alive in the adventure that is the gospel. The way out of this kind of small living, according to the gospel, is to get closer to Jesus and to the people who are trying to follow him. Unfortunately, you cannot get one without the other, according to Matthew. Jesus' sermon here is not addressed to individuals. It's addressed to the community that Jesus begins by calling the disciples. Richard Lisher says it this way: our only hope of living as a community of the Sermon on the Mount is to acknowledge that we do not retaliate, hate, curse, lust, divorce, swear, brag, preen, worry, or backbite, because it is not in the nature of our God or our destination that we should be such a people. When we as individuals fail in these instances, as we invariably do, we do not snatch up cheap forgiveness, but we do remember that the ecclesial, the church, is larger than the sum of our individual failures, and that it is pointed in a direction which will carry us away from them. It is pointed in a direction that will carry us away from them. Or as Stanley Hauerwas puts it, no one is asked to go out and try to be poor in spirit, or mourn, or to be meek. Rather, Jesus is indicating that given the reality of the kingdom, we should not be surprised to find among those who follow him those who are poor in spirit, those who do mourn, those who are meek. Jesus does not suggest that everyone who follows him will possess all of the Beatitudes, but we can be sure that some will be poor, some will mourn, and some will be meek. To be saved, in other words, according to Matthew's gospel, is to be gathered in the community around Jesus. Now, this could be one of the hardest teachings that Jesus offers in a society of people who keep trying to get to heaven by expanding the self-help section in our living libraries. I mean, I am really good at being meek or peaceful in the privacy of my own home, away from people who push my buttons. You know who you are. And there's always that one person in church who pushes your buttons. But that's where the joy can be found, according to Matthew, among real people. That is, real people with real issues who are trying to follow Jesus in a real way. And sometimes, I'd say it's pretty magical, like yesterday in our retreat with the people that you elected back in October to govern our church. One person witnessed to their own experience of God doing new things in our congregation and in their life. Another person testified to the daily meditation practices that were teaching them to stay in their heart and body, not just in their head, bringing more of their full self into their life and calling. We stayed curious and open together about what a more diverse, more connected, more missional congregation, attuned more closely to the lives of children and youth in particular, what that would look like, and what we would change to lead us closer to there. Once, when one person noted that though the culture of our congregation has tended to poo-poo some musical genres, the experience of them actually singing total praise in the choir had opened their heart and eyes to real joy in a way that had caught them off guard. I looked around and I thought I saw some deep breathing being practiced by a few other elders, trying not to slip back into pathetic imagination. You see, practicing prophetic imagination isn't always easy in a world that wants us to go to our corners and prepare to fight. But I'll tell you this, when 3 o'clock rolled around yesterday, I think I can safely say that everybody in that room felt more alive than when they had arrived that morning. And it wasn't because of my coffee brewing skills. It wasn't because of some high-tech facilitator techniques. It was because when Jesus first gathers people together, it is unlike any kind of gathering the world usually sees. People from all kinds of backgrounds and differences you can imagine. Just as he called together those first disciples, so he calls us together and teaches us a new way to deal with wrongdoing by forgiving. A new way to deal with violence through suffering. A new way to deal with money by sharing. A new way to organize our leadership with every member bringing their gifts into the whole. A new way of relationship with larger society and relationships with each other. A new way to be human. And underneath all of our frustrations with the world as we find it, with all the doubts that I know we all bring, with all of our worries about our living or our dying, I sense that most of us do believe that Jesus' way together offers us that opportunity to come alive, that aliveness that most of us are after.